Started here momentarily if those of you that are standing want to grab a seat, and we'll get started. All right, just a couple housekeeping items. I do want to alert all of you that today's workshop is being video recorded. So if you have an aversion to that, I don't know. I guess you can stand out in the hallway and listen to the presentations. There is a sign-in sheet as well, so if you have not signed in yet, please do so. And there are also some handouts as well. I believe there are 3 handouts back there. So if you didn't grab a handout when you came in, please go back there and do that as well, or raise your hand and we can get some out to you. All right, so hopefully you are all here to talk about improving Southern Nevada's federal grant capacity and competitiveness. If you don't know me, I am Raymond Hess. If you had a hard time visioning what I look like with a haircut wearing a tie, that's what I look like with a haircut and a tie. Otherwise, I look like this. So we'll take a vote later to see which version of me you prefer. I shaved in that one too. Sorry. It's not that I don't find you all very important, but you know, I'm going for a new look. The wife likes, anyway, I won't go into that. Okay, so hopefully, again, all of you are aware about what Southern Nevada Strong is. Southern Nevada Strong was a major initiative that was kicked off back in 2011 when the city of Henderson received a grant on behalf of the region from the Sustainable Communities Initiative, which was a partnership between DOT, HUD, and EPA. And ultimately that set a vision for what the valley could and should be looking forward. After 3 years of intensive data collection and going out to the community to really understand what the community's desires were, a plan was developed that had included in it over 300 different strategies about how we can make our region more resilient. And specifically, those focal areas are focused on, ultimately I like to say Southern Nevada Strong boils down to one word, and that's choice. The choice for better housing options, the choice for better transportation options, the choice for better educational opportunities, as well as employment opportunities. And so all of that really is what Southern Nevada Strong is about, and giving people more opportunities to pursue the things that are important to them and to make our region more resilient. One of the strategies that was identified therein had to do with how we can become more competitive for federal funding and how we can use some of different strategies to implement some of the things that are identified in that plan. Stakeholders identified the need for dedicated and consistent funding for implementation of the tasks that are identified in the plan. To meet these funding needs, stakeholders agreed that in addition to developing local funding options, we had to kind of collaborate more effectively and figure out how we can leverage each other's resources to pursue those funding opportunities. These efforts focused on increasing communication, coordination, and collaboration among nonprofit organizations, local governments, state governments, higher education institutions, and community-based organizations, of which many of you here in this room represent, if not all of you. Working to increase federal grant funding could fundamentally improve the nonprofit funding landscape with an influx of new dollars, better equipping them to meet the needs of the community both today and in the future for the region as a whole. Some of you probably know this statistic, but an area that we are not particularly proud of, I think. We are 49th in the country in terms of federal grant funding per capita. And so this was identified as a need in our community, and there's an opportunity for us, obviously, to do better at that, especially if we work together and collaboratively. Now, when Southern Nevada Strong was finished at the end of 2015, there was a discussion had locally about where that should rest in terms of further implementation. And ultimately a decision was made that it come to the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. Now, as I'm sure many of you can appreciate, the RTC is not necessarily a specialist when it comes to housing or grants or a number of things that are identified in the plan. So it's really important for us to collaborate and convene with stakeholders in the community. And so we decided that it was, we surveyed the landscape to see who was operating in this space, and we ultimately partnered with the Gwynn Center, the Nevada Community Foundation, United Way, the Nevada State Office of Grant Procurement, Coordination, and Management, and Southern Nevada Strong as well. And we do have several of those folks in the audience today, and I'd like to acknowledge them and see if they'd like to say a few words. So Nancy Brune, do you want to go first from Gwynn Center? Yeah.
Good afternoon. So the Gwynn Center is a statewide bipartisan think tank, and as I told a group of folks up in Reno a couple of weeks ago, We do three things. We drive important conversations, we provide clarity, and we build capacity where there's either none or folks just need some help getting started. And then we do that by providing data-driven research, which Meredith Levine will present later. So for all of those reasons, we've been really proud and grateful to be part of this group. In addition to just having the opportunity to work with some great folks, and really I think Southern Nevada is a small community, it's become even smaller as a result of this work, and so it is so much easier to pick up the phone, share an idea, brainstorm with folks who've been part of these conversations. The other thing I've really appreciated about this effort is that it is long-term. We have sustained conversations for almost a better part of 2 years. And I think a lot of us in this room, we're change agents, we want to see change, we get really impatient, but change is hard and it takes time. And I've really appreciated Southern Nevada Strong's leadership in saying, hey, this is a long-term project. We're going to be having these conversations for 24 years. So we are happy to support and be part of this. I will say, I think the fruits of our labor are starting to pay off. So it's been interesting in the last couple of months. I've been in the room with local agency officials, and they themselves have acknowledged the need to be project ready and grant ready and be prepared to go after federal grants. We've also had about 6 nonprofit organizations in the region come to us and say, hey, we've heard you talk about data for a year. We are ready to sit down with you and figure out how the Gwynn Center can help us think about data, collect data, use data so that we can report it and be part of the competitiveness around federal grants. So again, we're happy to be part of these conversations and look forward to continuing them.
And then, John Brosco, why don't we have you come up and speak on the Nevada Community Foundation's behalf?
Thank you. Guys, okay if I do from here? Sure. Nobody's ever told me I'm not loud enough. Usually takes me about 2 minutes just to clear my throat, so I'm going to try to keep it shorter than that. How many folks in the room attend or think they're going to apply for grants as a result of this work in the next history report? How many folks? Oh, don't worry. Oh, never mind. I guess I am going up here. That's fine. How many folks in the room think they're going to anticipate applying for grants in the next couple of years based on this work? So it starts right here, right? And you are all to be commended for taking time out of your days, leaving your organizations to make yourselves available to be here. I know how tempting it must have been to say, it's Monday, just got off the weekend, and we just don't have time to come today. But this is where it starts, and you are visionaries in your willingness to understand and appreciate that this work will not go anywhere. The gains that we've made will not go anywhere without your efforts. So this is really the beginning. I thank the RTC and Southern Nevada Strong for their leadership role in this. They're also to be commended as visionaries. And the Ritter Charitable Trust, I see John and Hillary here. There are folks who literally 4 or 5 years ago were talking about this issue. And it's because of them that we are here today. Nevada Community Foundation 4 or 5 years ago had this as a difficult conversation ourselves. We are thrilled that with the work of our other stakeholders, that we're in a place where Nevada's had 3 new pieces of legislation passed, and the budget for the Office of Grants Management has doubled. But none of that will go anywhere. It will all be for naught without these types of workshops and the participation of you folks in the room. So thank you so much for leaving your offices. I guarantee you it'll be worth the effort, and we're just thrilled with the results so far, and any way that we can help, please let us know. I know most of you, but if I haven't met you before, please reach out to my office and make an appointment so I can sit down and learn about what you're doing. Okay, thank you very much.
And then lastly, if we could have Mr. Scott Emerson from United Way come on down as well. Come on down. It's a longer walk.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today because this really does look like a wedding ceremony. I just want to say thank you all for being here. And, if you think about it, the easy problems in our community have all been solved. And what we are left with are the incredibly difficult and complex ones that don't make fiscal sense. And it's going to take the innovation and creativity of all of us in the room to come together in ways we've never assembled before to solve those problems. I think historically we have been able to solve some problems with partnership networks, is what I call them. And the future is going to require us to really work as true collaboratives together, which means that we have to be vulnerable, we have to trust each other, and we have to give something of ourselves in order to sacrifice to be part of the whole and focus on the real issue at hand and the people who are suffering in our community. So we are in it at United Way for a matter of conviction, not convenience, and we are in the fight to win it and make some demonstrated changes in the community. And my pledge to you is to not sleep or eat. No, not sleep. I will eat. Until we get some of these collaboratives juiced up and working. There's a lot of great work being done out there. Our role is to help celebrate that and lift that, not replace it. So thank you all for being here, and eager to see what we're going to have today.
So again, we're indebted to the partners in this process because we really couldn't have advanced this issue without them. They have the know-how, they have the skill set, they have the institutional knowledge to really help us understand what some of the challenges are and how we can advance those forward. So, again, Southern Nevada Strong provided this kind of, it identified this need in the community, and working with our partners, we got together and we said, okay, who can we bring to the table? How can we develop a strategy for how we can become more competitive? And so a work group was formed, and it was made up of folks from Boys and Girls Club, Help of Southern Nevada, Catholic Charities of Southern Nevada, Communities and Schools, First Person Care Clinic, Goodwill, Nevada Hand, Opportunity Village, the Rape Crisis Center, 3 Square, Village PBS, Volunteers in Medicine of Southern Nevada. And we had several workshops last year that facilitated that and kind of helped develop the framework that we're going to show you here in just a minute. And so a big thank you to all of those partners as well that helped move this issue along. So the strategic framework has 2 primary goals identified. From a high level, the framework focuses on making sure that Southern Nevada nonprofits would be able to submit high-quality, competitive federal grant applications. And secondly, that the region's nonprofit, local governments, civic leaders, and policymakers would work together to coordinate actions that prioritize and secure federal funding. Many of the success stories you'll hear today largely focus on achieving one or both of these goals. We have some of these partners here, and I'd like to, well, we already heard from Nancy and Scott, so we don't need to hear from them. All right, so that brings me to the first person on our panel today, which is, Meredith Levine. So to kick off the program, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Meredith Levine from the Gwynn Center for Policy Priorities. She's responsible for analyzing public policies related to economic development, land usage, infrastructure, water, energy, and the environment, as well as fiscal, budgetary, and tax policies. Meredith? It's a big title.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I am going to be setting the table for the conversations that follow. So mostly this is going to be an emphasis on the data and what the federal policy or the federal data streams look like in the state, particularly with an emphasis on grants. And then we're going to connect that up to the budget, because that is something that it's not always clear how those relate to one another. So where we want to start is that federal funds account for approximately 1/3 of all revenues in the biennial budget. And then they also flow into nonprofits and into local governments, county governments, and so forth. And we've already talked about the partnership. We're very grateful for that partnership and to work on federal grant capacity and competitiveness in the state. So with that, let's take a look at federal financial assistance per capita. This shows you the Intermountain West states, but what we actually have here is a ranking of Nevada relative to all states, and it's ranked from highest to lowest. This is a compilation of every transaction reported by federal agencies, at least at the 25,000 level or above. And so we're looking at direct payments here, loans and insurance, grants, contract loans. This is the basic setup of how federal money comes into the state and what that looks like. And what the per capita adjustment does is to show the sort of comparison across all states. So what do we see when we look at Nevada? Well, we see kind of that low number. It is relatively low. We did hit 51 in FY 2010. We've improved since the Medicaid funding, and that the full capture of that is in fiscal 15. But again, we're still at 44th. We are down at the bottom with Utah in that regard. Now, just a caveat here real quick, which is to say that federal financial assistance can reflect several different things. It could reflect a very wealthy state in the sense of there's a lot of contracts and grants and so forth coming into the state, or it could mean a very poor state because there's needs. So, don't, I guess, extract anything necessarily from the idea of ranking so much as to say that in comparative context, we do tend to be a bit lower. So that is, again, the basic streams. And what happens, though, if we look at federal grants? Now, that actually, this is some good news, right? If we disaggregate by federal grants and we look at total grants, what does that look like? Well, over the period federal fiscal year 2000 to fiscal year 17, even when inflation is taken into account, total grants have increased by 154.4%. So that seems like we're doing really good. We're coming up. And again, you look at that spike in FY 2015, that is the Medicaid spike. So that's what you're seeing right there. And then there is a tapering off. But overall, there's a general pattern of increase. So again, we're excited, grants, we're improving, and then not so much. So when, again, you look at federal grants per capita, and this is showing the Intermountain West states, all states are kind of increasing over this time period. So when we do the per capita adjustment on grants, it's not quite good. Again, there's the increase in grants per capita as a result of Medicaid expansion, but there is the thereafter decrease. So again, looking at the numbers, we start out at 38, not so bad. We're at 51 again in fiscal 11, and we're at about 44 for the last federal fiscal year. So again, we saw that number, it was 49. So again, it depends on which data source you use and where you're at, but the general takeaway here is that we are toward the bottom in terms of grants. Now, the next 3 slides I'm gonna address are gonna look at grants on a more granular level in the state, and just a word of note that these are grant amounts. These are not grant transactions. So it's not total number of awards, but grant award amounts. So let's start here. This shows you the ratios of dollars of the grant money to other money. Each stack column segment is calculated as a percentage of the total. That'll be true in the next 2 slides as well, so I'll get that out of the way now. But what you see is that regardless of year, federal grants relative to other federal money awarded is relatively low. So if we wanted to, again, look at the most recent concluded fiscal year, federal, 2017, how do we interpret that particular column? So federal grant money was about 29% of the total, and all other federal money is 71% of the total. Let's put that into dollar amounts. For every dollar of federal funds awarded to the state, 28.8 cents is grant money, and the other 71.2 cents is other federal money, so that's $1 for every $2.50. And now we're going to look at federal grants by recipient type. So, in the data, there's a lot of different recipients. We aggregated that into governments, education, nonprofits, so forth. You'll see in FY 2007, there's a problem with the data. We did leave everything as in the original. Again, there's a data quality issue around this, and we know this in the state, but we wanted to, again, almost leave it to address the point that there is a data quality problem. However, so what we see here is, and really the purpose of this slide is to give you a sense of working with state and local government partners better. This is going to give you that recipient type breakdown, but what this really shows is that governments of all jurisdictional types combined receive the majority of federal grants money in the state. So, if you wanted to look at federal fiscal 16, governments received about $4.7 billion in federal funds, or 93.2% of all grant money. And by way of comparison, nonprofits received about $101.4 million. So there's a big difference, and that's 2%. When we turn to assistance type, again, just noting that, again, problems in the data, Medicaid is coded wrong. Medicaid is coded as a block grant. It's not, it's a formula grant. And that's true in 2007 and 8. But again, we see here that formula grants do outweigh other grant types. So, let's take another example, federal fiscal year 2011. The state received about $2 billion in formula grants, or 74.2% of all grant money. And then in the same year, project grants were about 366 million, so these are the competitive grants, or 13.7% of all federal grant money. And so increases in federal grant money, for formula grants relative to other types probably do reflect Medicaid expansion. The purpose of this slide is really to emphasize the importance and scale of project-based grant funding, and again, it's scaled very low comparative to formula grants, but having that data on formula grants is quite essential. And now I want to kind of kick over to the budget, and I think that this is where it's sometimes hard to make the leap, but essentially, in this particular, depending on which, again, source you look at, there's either 5 funds or 6 funds that fund the government. In this slide, we're going to look at 5 funds. And what that shows is, if you can't see it, the red is the federal fund. Now, here's something you should know about the federal fund. When you actually dig into it, the federal fund is 99.9%, regardless of year, 99.9% grant money. So there seems to be this disconnect where a lot of the money flowing through the budget is federal money, but it is not capturing the true picture, because as we saw, that 71 cents versus 28.8 cents on the ratio, but it is true that the grant money does come through the federal budget. So that can sometimes be a little confusing. What I think is important to see here is sort of the limitations of federal funds. So what's on this slide is sort of organized in order from which agency receives the most federal funding to which receives the least. So starting over here, Department of Agriculture, significant portion, and then you get the majorities and then it declines. By the time you get to the controller's office, there's 0 federal money. And so when we start to think about certain things, could more money be obtained? Are there unmet needs? We can look at the pattern within agencies and see that actually federal funding is not carrying the weight of a lot of these departments. So let's do a little thought experiment, which we all enjoy. So now let's turn to state fiscal year, and this is 2017. And I wanted to show you this because this is actual revenue. So here's your 7 or your 6, not your 5 funding sources. But what you see here is total revenue for state fiscal 17 is about $12 billion. You see that the federal fund contributes that third, which I noted at the beginning, and then you see that the general fund is a little bit less than a third, but approximately equal contributors. And it looks like, again, that the federal and the general are kind of carrying their weight. But here's where the thought experiment begins. What would happen if we were to exclude Medicaid? Now, of course, we are not excluding Medicaid. Medicaid its particularly expansion, has brought health care to 200,000 plus Nevadans, so we're not trying to do this, but it's kind of a good experiment just to see what it's doing. So what is Medicaid doing? Medicaid is actually, this is an exclusion or a subtraction. So again, this is hypothetical or theoretical. What would happen if we pulled Medicaid out? Does the federal fund still carry the weight of the budget? And the answer is no. What you see is a change. This is because Medicaid, by the way, is 64.2% of the federal fund. So what you see is a decrease in the federal fund in this hypothetical scenario from about 33.1% to 15.1%. And then the general fund goes up to about 40%. So this counterfactual essentially suggests that outside of Medicaid, which helps disguise the contribution of the 6 funds, the federal fund is not as much of a contributor as it first appears. So you can see again that grants are not doing perhaps what they need to do, and it puts an upward pressure on the general fund. And the general fund has sort of a limitation as well, right? It's sourced primarily by the state sales tax, which varies with market conditions. Property tax goes to local governments. We don't have income tax. So by not chasing grant dollars, we are putting a lot of pressure on the general fund. Real quick, just to close again on Medicaid, with again the caveat that Medicaid is a valuable program. One thing that this does show, again, is the potential for skew in that Medicaid data. And so what you see is that Medicaid, they track each other until Medicaid expansion, federal fiscal year 15, which does capture the first full year of that expansion. You do see the lines begin to diverge. And again, this seems to suggest that Medicaid is driving a sense that grants are improving in a way that they might not be. So now let me close with 3 takeaways that I would like you to have, and I'll just leave that up in case you need our contact info. But the first takeaway is that Nevada has underperformed in federal grants for a long time. Federal grants account for huge sums of revenue in the state, and if we make a larger priority of them, we should expect to see an increase in revenue, and those funds will go to programs, services, and projects. And, you know, again, the third takeaway is that we rely on the federal grants to fund a lot of programming, and we have relatively limited revenue streams in which to do that. Again, here's your no income and the property tax going locally. So this could set us up for a funding crisis, and the more we chase those federal grants, the more that we could help offset any potential variability that is associated with that. With that, thank you.
It's just the handouts, I guess. All right. Thank you, Meredith. So you heard as part of that presentation and previously that a lot of the federal funds that come through our area have to go through the state. And so we want to talk to the state for just a second. So it's extremely important that we collectively establish a direct line of communication with the Nevada Grants Office and see them as a resource. And I can attest that Connie Lucido and her team have really been a tremendous help for us. Just recently we reached out to them and helped, they helped identify some grant opportunities for one of our partners, and we're very much indebted to that assistance. So just a little bit of background on Connie. Connie has served in public administration in both state and local government for 15 years. She has a strong background in federal grant policies, auditing, and program development, as well as aligning strategic initiatives and cooperative teaming. Her experience resides in public health, human services, public safety, and several large education projects. She leads an extraordinary team at the Nevada Grants Office, which is responsible to facilitate cooperative relationships that foster grant development and planning, ensure training to address the needs of Nevada's grant workforce, as well as providing technical assistance to all Nevada agencies. Connie, thank you for coming in.
Hi. Yeah, I pushed you off. Thank you. Thank you all. My name is Connie Lucido. I'm here from the State Grants Office. I appreciate you all coming, spending your afternoon here, and allowing me a few minutes to share some of what our office does. Those of you that are not familiar with us, hopefully you'll learn and value us as a resource. And those of you that are familiar with us, hopefully we can clarify a little bit about what our office does and how we can assist. As Meredith said, we have been looking and talking about grants for a very long time, over the last 10 years that I'm aware of. Our office was created as a result of some of that conversation. We were created in 2011 session, and our sole purpose was to assist agencies in both identifying grant opportunities and applying for grant opportunities. Office of Grant Procurement Coordination and Management is the name of our office. The short version is the State Grants Office. So if you've heard of us, this is who we are. We're unique in that we reside under the Department of Administration. That is not the Department of Health. It's not education or public safety or any of those organizations. Department of Administration houses agencies like Fleet Services and Human Resources and Information Technology. So we exist in Department of Admin to help other organizations carry out their missions. And that's really the purpose in what our office does. We provide technical assistance to organizations to talk about Code of Federal Regulations. We assist in putting applications together. We procure or we amplify grant opportunities. Every other week we push out through listserv grant opportunities. And if you're not on that listserv, I encourage you to please reach out to the office and get on that listserv. Right now we're focusing primarily on federal grants, but we hope in the next few months to start to include some foundation opportunities as well. Our main focus, as Meredith pointed out, there's several different types of grants. We play a lot around in discretionary. There is such a thing called mandatory as well, and if you look at our little handout here, Partnership Path Forward, there is a graph there that shows us that there are many, many there's many, many dollars that are associated with mandatory programs. Those are our formula grants, block grants, and those sorts of grants. Our primary focus is discretionary dollars. And the way that we have found that works more or most successful is to really collaborate on cooperative partnerships to put together successful applications. The purpose in our office is not to substitute your relationship with state agencies, though. As I said, we're not Health and Human Services or education. We still encourage and want you to work with those groups, reach out to them, build rapport with them in your service areas. But we're encouraging groups to start really communicating what their organization does really well, what another organization does really well, and then figure out what that gap is and reach out to your local governments, reach out to our office, reach out to state agencies, find those opportunities. Let's identify where those opportunities exist that we can start bridging some of those gaps. If you're not familiar with who to reach out to, call my office. We'll figure out. If we don't know who it is, we'll figure out who it is, or the most likely suspect, right? We will also help you put together those applications. If you've got excellent grant writers in your office, that's wonderful. We've also existed to evaluate your applications before you submit them. Oftentimes, you're very ingrained. You know your programs, you know your office. And the community. So if you have someone else evaluate that grant that you've written, very often we can help you find where you can strengthen your application. So we encourage you to use our office for that as well. Lastly, I'm going to say I encourage you to apply direct for federal funds, especially in all of those areas that say eligible nonprofits. And please feel free. We are a state agency. I will always try to connect you with state agencies, but our office is also has worked very collaboratively with nonprofits and local governments. So we exist in the state, but we're here with all the same mission to move grants forward in Nevada. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you for pointing out the handouts as well. There are two great handouts, one from the Nevada State Grant Office and one from the Gwynn Center back there, as well as a third from Southern Nevada Strong. So it's a good little primer to get you up to speed on everything that we're talking about. All right, so next we want to hear from a panel. And we felt it was crucial to learn how to work with the State Grants Office. The objective of this panel specifically is to help us better understand how grants flow between federal, state, and local governments and nonprofits here in Southern Nevada, and the need to work closely together to maximize grant award and management. We have a special moderator for this panel, Mr. Benoit Jacob. He is, or probably Dr. Benoit Jacob. He's the associate professor and the program coordinator for the Urban Leadership Program at UNLV, and his research focuses on the growth and governance of cities, in particular issues of public finance, state and local relationships, and social diversity and equity. Benoit, you want to come on up and introduce the panel? Sir?
Thank you. No one calls me doctor ever, so that's perfectly fine. In fact, my wife wouldn't believe it if anyone did, so that's excellent. And I think the plan of action here is, rather than me sit here and read the bios of the panelists, I'm just going to invite the panelists to come on up, and we'll give them a minute or two to introduce themselves. They can certainly do a better job than myself. Yeah. Come on up. Yeah, don't be shy. Let me just preface this by saying, so I've had an opportunity to moderate various panels at various times, and in some ways this is an easy job, and in some ways it's a hard job. What makes it easy is when you have great panelists. What makes it hard is when you don't have such great panelists. In this case, this is going to be a super easy job, and so I'm just excited to be here because I think I got not a lot to do. So let me just ask folks to introduce themselves one at a time. So I have been given instructions. I plan not to follow very many of them, but at least with respect to this, If you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your organization's mission, describe the role of the federal grants play in your organization, and identify the single most important factor with respect to your organization's ability to get federal grants. And you have 2 minutes or less to do all of that in. So we'll start at the far end.
Hi, everybody. My name is Julia Peak, and I'm the Deputy Administrator. I told Connie I got promoted to Deputy Director, but that's not true. I am the Deputy Administrator for the Division of Public and Behavioral Health. That's one of the agencies within the state DHHS. So my very first day on the job, right out of graduate school, they said, here's the STD grant. It's due in like 2 weeks. Never written a grant in my life. So literally the last 12 years now has been writing grants, administering grants. And now as the deputy over this section, we have about $116 million a year in our section. That's just federal grants, and that's 70% of just our budget. And so it's sad, but we are so reliant on those federal grants that if we lose one of those grants, the program closes. So that's a huge challenge for us. But across DHHS as a whole, we have 5 departments, or divisions, I should say: Public and Behavioral Health, Welfare and Supportive Services, Division of Child and Family Services, so that's your CPS, SNAP, TANF, some of those programs, Aging and Disability Services Division, and Medicaid, Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy. And Medicaid is about 74% of our total budget for DHHS. And then we also have the Public Defender's Office. And our mission is improving the health and well-being of all Nevadans. 2 minutes?
Like,
Ish.
listen, if there's a place I'm going to fall short, I didn't bring any timing device, so I say 2 minutes, but could be anything. Sounded about 2 minutes. Sounded good.
Take advantage of that.
Yeah, super.
Good afternoon. I'm Kristen Cooper, and I'm with the Department of Social Service at Clark County. I am the manager for Community Resources Management, and we do the work on all of the block grants from HUD. We also receive a Justice Department grant called JAG. So the Department of Social Service, however, is a much larger department, has a lot of federal funding, although the majority is actually from the state and from local government. We have too many divisions to name, but the Research and Development Unit in particular is responsible for seeking out new additional federal funds, as well as we also look around for those things to see what we can find. For us, it's not really, unless it's a very large grant, it's really, it's not something we will go after. We will, however, we try to support our nonprofit partners in finding and going after funding for their particular areas of interest. What was the other question? Oh, our responsibilities for our mission is to help the indigent and the most vulnerable in the community, particularly single or adults, individual adults. DFS handles children. Department of Family Services. And then the single most important factor in our organization's federal grant success is mission focus. We stay focused on who it is that we are trying to serve. In particular, we are interested in reducing poverty and the generational effects of poverty in our community.
Right. Thank you. David.
All right, good afternoon. I'm David Paul. I'm the Director of Real Estate Development for Nevada Hand. Nevada Hand is a nonprofit organization that's been serving the community for 25 years. Our mission is to improve the lives of low-income people through affordable housing solutions and supportive services. We develop, we manage, we own, and we build affordable housing. We strive to give people opportunities to live well, to improve their circumstances. I actually work closely with Kristen every year for federal grants. In my role in real estate development, I secure all the funding for our multifamily affordable housing communities, of which is directly funded from federal grants about 10 to 20%. On any given year, that can be upwards of $3 to $5 million. And most of those grants are administered by local agencies such as Clark County, City of Las Vegas, City of Henderson, and is the state as well. Additionally, I serve a dual role. I'm on the Affordable Housing Advisory Council of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. which advises the Home Loan Bank on how we grant funds to affordable housing causes in California, Nevada, and Arizona. And to give you an idea of the size of that, last year we granted $100 million to those 3 states for affordable housing causes.
Super. Thank you. Rosh.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here talking to you all about federal grants today. A very exciting topic, but a very important topic for our community as well. My name is Arash, and I'm the Executive Director of Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. I think it's awkward I know it's awkward for other people to read your bio, but it's especially awkward for you to talk about yourself in front of a room for people, so forgive me if I had to look at notes to remind myself of my bio. No, I'm kidding.
And Rosh will still go over 2 minutes.
Oh, I guarantee I will go over 2 minutes, so someone cut me off. Long story short, though, aside from my day job sort of as the leader of this organization, other things I do is I play a pretty active role with our local COC and leadership roles in helping our community build capacity. I serve on several national and local boards as well around youth homelessness and really on how to instill sound business practices to the nonprofit sector. So for me, my passion is the intersection of business policy and community and how those things can benefit the social services sector. So what my organization does, we are the most comprehensive service provider of homeless youth services here in Southern Nevada, but we grew from a very small citizens coalition since 2001 till now. So I'm kind of representing the small nonprofit hat, but we've grown definitely over the years to better serve our population, and federal grants have played a pretty critical role in that success. Our organization benefits greatly from direct and pass-through grants. About 50% of our budget is from federal direct or pass-through funding streams. And I should mention that every time we try to grow the amount of federal grants that we get, we also try to grow our budget by that same amount through non-federal revenue sources as well, so we can, make sure not to reduce the risk of concentration on a singular funding stream, especially federal streams, since, right now the political climate's kind of unique out there. Every day the headlines kind of make my stomach turn as to, is HHS going to be open next year? Is ACF going to be disbanded? Is HUD going to be around? So given that, you want to make sure really to diversify your revenue streams as much as possible. Federal grants play a critical role in what we do because it allows us to explore new ideas. It allows us to expand our existing offerings. But in addition from set-aside monies, federal grants allow us, they connect us to national learning communities, to best practices that otherwise we wouldn't be exposed of here locally as easily. And that's been huge for our success in terms of learning and building our capacity to even be more competitive with federal grants and other types of grants as well. So the learning communities thing is really important because it allows us to hone our strategy. And lastly, federal grants allow us to really practice more traditional business practice as well. It's really tough to run an agency and provide high quality services when every 9 months you have to think about, where am I going to get this money? Am I going to have the guarantee of this money? No, I'm not. So every 9 months you have to develop like 5 different backup plans. But federal funds typically fund in a pro forma fashion, so that allows you to have multi-year revenue streams, not guaranteed, but secured at least. So that allows you to think bigger and focus on actually providing those services and buying yourself the time to explore sustainability investments around those initiatives that the federal grant is funding. So even the practice of applying to federal grants keeps you sharp, keeps you competitive, and keeps you kind of understanding what the emerging and best practices sort of are. So those are ways that federal grants really contribute to our organization's success.
Super. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
wonderful.
no.
You're perfect
good.
segue. So let me also just, let me frame a little bit of this, right? So what we heard in the first 2 presentations was a little bit of this 15,000 foot level of what grants look like and what the granting issues are in the state sort of in general. Working within that context then are organizations like this and the organizations you all are a part of. And so what we want to do with these folks today is we want to get a sense of where the rubber meets the road and sort of what these organizations are doing to enhance their the state's ability and their ability to access federal grants. And so the first question really, which I think Arash started to touch on a little, and I think all the panelists started to touch on a little bit, is if you can help me, and this is just to whoever wants to jump in first, help us all understand maybe 1 or 2 things that your organization has done in the last few years to really improve your capacity or your ability to access these competitive granting opportunities.
Okay, I'll start. The best way to answer this question for me is to think about our agency sort of as a young person, or any agency really trying to become more competitive with federal grants, as sort of a young person trying to build credit. Before you can really reach a credit score that's going to help you get to the point where you can get better credit, get those loans and other financial tools, you must first work on building your own credit so that creditors can be more reassured of the risk that they're taking on you. So you have to work to successfully pay back debt, pay on time, and other things in order to improve your credit to make yourself more worthy for further, credit and investment. So similarly, our agency has been working over the past 4 or 5 years to really improve ourselves in order to be more attractive for federal investment. So in other words, we've been working on increasing our informal federal credit score. That way we can get to the 700s and above and be more competitive. And I'll tell you how we did that. So we embarked on a multi-year strategy to become more attractive. We now do, and it has been successful because we now do get direct funding from HUD. We've brought Department of Justice funding to our community around sex trafficking, actually, which isn't even our direct core area. We've, in the last 2-3 years, also secured highly competitive Department of Health and Human Services grants to help expand our drop-in center. And for the last, I think, 7 years now, we've been partnering with the county and another agency in town to bring a different type of funding stream, transitional living program, maternity group home, also from Health and Human Services as well. So not only are we collaborating with other agencies to bring in resources, but we're also directly applying to those. But the 2 quick things I'll tell you to do: one, you need to really emulate the structure of successful applications. One of the things that we did many years ago as part of our strategy is that we started downloading and finding every successful grant application that we could find, every single one, whether it was in our subject matter area or not, to see how they structure, what they say, how they're responding to scoring, and how we could emulate and tweak that and translate that to what we're doing to be really competitive. And one of the other things is that, well, just like learning how to build your own credit, we had to learn and be honest with ourselves of where we're at versus where we wanted to be. And we embarked on several years of working on our programmatic and administrative side to help really increase our knowledge on what we need to have more internal capacity to be competitive and actually receive these grants as well. So we worked a lot on our financial and administrative capacity, but while we did that, we also started partnering with others and trying to go after grants. We knew we weren't competitive enough on the financial capacity side, but we knew that, for example, the county was. So we partnered with the county and another agency to get a grant that way. And then over time, we spent the time to invest in ourselves around building capacity and the infrastructure that we needed to not only administer the program side of the grants, but also the administrative and financial side of the grants. Because a lot of us can do the service side, but it takes a lot to administer a federal grant directly as well. So during that time, we learned how to do that, and we started applying to these grants directly ourselves, and slowly started seeing those successes come in. And we keep tweaking and adapting and working on building our credit, if you will, to be the most competitive that we can for these applications.
Person, I see you nodding your head. Oh, yeah. That's all right.
Yep. That's all excellent because, and we've seen the difference on my end because we manage the grants. So we've seen the difference in your capacity as well, which we appreciate.
Thank you.
Because it makes our job easier. And from my perspective, the county has hired somebody to actually be a grants coordinator for the county, and again, sort of similar to the state, Nevada, the grants office. Sorry, I just call you the grants office. I know you have a real official title. And the grants office, we have something like that as well at the county, and that's a relatively new pursuit, and so we're trying to advance that. And then within our department, we also have a grants writer now, and in fact, several people work on that, but Brenda's here, and they can tell you about what it's like to apply for federal grants because they can be relatively complex. And then, so resources is another thing that needs to be focused in order to get federal grants. And then I think relationships. Those relationships with your federal funders are so important. And if you haven't received federal funding before, that's okay. find out who they are that manage those grants and get to know them. And I don't know how you do that. Maybe you find out where they go drink on Friday night. But you show up and you introduce yourself. Hey, you got to do whatever you have to do. And you get to know them, because those relationships are really important. Yes, other people are going to be the ones perhaps scoring the applications, but those people have input into it as well, whether they want to admit it or not. So those relationships are
I
very
love
important.
it. So key takeaway there is to take the federal agency out for a drink. I love it.
Okay, maybe that wasn't a great example, but
No.
you get the point.
Yeah, no, the idea of relationships is critical, and we'll talk a little bit more about collaboration and these sorts of things in a second. But go ahead, David.
Sure. So
You can say no. You can say
what
no.
really what we've learned in the last 3 to 5 years is what we don't do well, and we've been learning how to partner with others who do those things well. Specifically for us, we've recently partnered with Boys and Girls Club to develop new Boys and Girls Clubs on our properties, which enhances our properties and the lives of our residents and the children that are on our properties. We also partnered with Help of Southern Nevada to develop the Shannon West Homeless Youth Shelter. We're not good at serving homeless. They are. We can develop. They can't. It was. I won't say it was an easy match there, but at the end of the day, it worked out pretty well. I will say that partnering is not an easy thing, and you will have growing pains. But if you want to be innovative and have a better chance at getting more federal grants and more money in the state of Nevada, you're going to have to partner to come up with innovative solutions. And so that's what we spend a lot of our time really focusing on. And then we continuously invest internally on staff for all kinds of purposes, for reporting, for accounting, for compliance, you name it. When I ask Kristen for a grant, she's more likely to give it to me because she knows our reporting is going to be spotless and it's going to be on time, and we're going to give her everything that she needs at the end of the day for her reporting to the federal government, which...
I will say, however, that I don't give you those grants. The
Yeah,
Citizens
yes,
Committee does
true,
that.
True. Kristen administers them.
Thank you, sorry.
And I will tell you that most of our grants are from our local agencies, which is much easier. They are much easier to deal with than the federal government, because we do have some with the federal government directly, and I can't use the language here that I would like to use describing some of those grants, but so please work with your local agencies. They are very willing to help you out.
Julia, I'm going to ask you just a little bit of a different question, because it's just coming up sort of over.
So many notes on that question.
I know.
No, I will
That's super. I think. Well, you can answer whatever you want to answer. Don't feel obligated. But hopefully it fits your notes, because there are two things that seem to be popping up in terms of folks saying, here's what's effective in terms of getting grants. One is administrative capacity, and the other is this collaborative set of relationships. And those two things seem to me a little bit related. How do you sort of improve either of those things or both those things, or answer whatever third question you wish to answer?
No, it's okay. I think I can work in my answers
Super.
that are
Great.
into this. No, so I would say stuff that DHHS has done ties into what you were saying. So I'd say the first thing that we've done over the past several years is to work with Connie's grant office. One of the huge benefits there is that I would say generally we all think we're really effective grant writers. And then it's helpful to have that third party review it, Connie's office, and say like, yeah, you totally didn't even answer this question that was 20 points. And it's like, well, that was moot. Did you see how good I answered that question? Yes, but you won't score well. So that's actually been hugely, hugely helpful to DHHS, and also funds that we push out. For example, we had Connie's office oversee the family planning funds that we were awarded this last session. And so DHHS did not have a part in that process. And at the last grant meeting that we attended, one of the evaluation committee members had said, I was shocked at how poorly they were written. And it's sad. I know pretty much everybody who applied, and they're a great agency to work with, but perhaps their ability to write a really effective grant is lacking. And so that made me sad to learn that. So I think we really need to work on training of staff, and also those people we have writing grants to to be critical of the way they write it and make sure they're addressing all the points. It's really difficult. So some of the things that we've done to address the administrative process, at least for public and behavioral health, is we took about a week and did a Kaizen event, for those of you who've done those things. And Connie actually attended that. It was really painful, all the processes we go through to actually just write the grant application. And so that was helpful to us to see how we can take a step back and make that a little more lean so that we could get a grant out really quickly. The other things that I think are really important with the collaboration, I'll say, is to assess if DHHS is the best applicant. In many cases, we should do a bona fide agent. And you guys spoke to it before. We might not be the best to write that application, and we might not have the capacity to do it. So in the past, I think our strategy was we write the grant and we have ownership of the grant, and then we decide who gets the award. That's a huge challenge and actually delays the process a great deal. So if you know, for example, in Southern Nevada, UNLV's Community Health Sciences, anything related to lead or childhood lead, automatically, I call Sean, you're writing it, bona fide agent, I already have it ready for you the minute I see that grant hit. But that's the relationship building. If I hadn't known UNLV was so effective at that topic, maybe we would have written it, maybe we would have passed on it. So it's super important, again, to make those relationships known and your priorities known so that when that grant hits, we know bona fide agent, or if it has to be state, we write it and push the money to you, and how can we do that effectively? Also, we've used Connie's office a lot because she's the single point of contact for the state. So technically, if you're going to apply for one of these grants, you should let Connie know. And so the first thing when I see a grant hit, people are emailing me all the time, we want to go after this. So I go to Connie and say, who else is on the table for this grant, and how do we approach it? Because there's so much duplication. And one of the last grants that was applied for, the rurals were competing with Clark, and it's like, oh, it's so sad to do that. But we're going to encourage it because potentially both could be funded. But it would be so much better if we could figure out how to do better collaboration and write one really effective grant for the state. But that's a challenge. Also, some things to highlight at DHHS that we're doing. We have now a work group looking at grant management across all those divisions I named. And so we're looking at our processes, our forms. If there's a way to standardize how we're doing things, we're trying to do that so that you don't have a different form every agency you're working with, so that it is an easier process, because it can be very intimidating, especially when it comes to site visits and audits and those kind of things. Also, we've centralized all our data. So if you want to apply for a grant and it's very specific, I want to do this zip code, I want to know how many families are in poverty in this area and have food security issues, for example. We can pull that data quickly and get it to you for your grant application, so that's something that we want to offer as a resource for you. Let me think. Yeah, I would say probably those are the main things I wanted to get across. Also, if we're looking at collaboration, first of all, like I said, we need to know you're out there. We had the ability to present a couple of months ago, I would say, at the Minority Health Coalition, and didn't even realize so many groups were out there for minority health. We're one of the only states that's minority majority, so we should be killing it when it comes to applying for those minority grants, and we're really not. So understanding that landscape is super important. Also, we look at your previous success, like they talked about. Have you done similar projects in the past and been successful? Because in many cases, we're the grantee, so we're going to be held accountable for the feds, so your success is our success. So we're going to look at that when we're trying to assess if we should award you funds.
Great, super. Just out of curiosity, how am I doing on time? I got some time. Oh, super, wonderful. I'll go a couple minutes over. Let me ask this one question, because I think it's important. So in my past life, when I was doing my PhD, I studied the growth and governance of cities, as Ray said. But in my mercenary sort of RA work, which paid for my schooling, I studied collaborative networks of scientists, and we studied NSF-funded research centers. And one of the findings across the board pretty clearly is that in order to sustain funding efforts requires fairly complicated and extensive collaborative sets of relationships. That's one, so that's the key to success. The second part of that is that doing that is extraordinarily hard, right? And people don't have really good lessons on how to do it. So if the key to success, as you all sort of suggested, is along with administrative capacity, building these relationships within Southern Nevada and the state more generally, How do we do it? How do we sustain it? And/or what are sort of the obstacles? What's preventing it from happening already?
What I would say, is that you need to come to things like this, and we need to have more of this. And I know that a lot of times we think that, oh, another summit or another workshop, but take advantage of those, because then while you're here, go up and shake the hand of somebody you don't know and tell them your name and your organization, because you never know where those collaborations are going to come from. Our successful projects have always been through those relationships. The Help Shannon West Center is a prime example of the community knowing that there was a need and trying to figure out a way that all of the jurisdictions could get together, work with Help, who ended up talking to Hand, who, because we had the relationship with Hand, and so everybody kind of brought everybody together. And then Henderson was in that, North Las Vegas, the city of Las Vegas, so everybody participated. Because there were those relationships already built, because in our case, as a Southern Nevada consortium, we get together once every 2 months. And this is just the jurisdictions, along with the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority, and some other partners that we have in the community, not any nonprofits. It's all of us federal wonky people. And we talk about our rules and what we have to do, but then we also talk about what's going on in the community. What are the things we're seeing that are popping up that are issues? What can we do about them? What are some of the innovative things we've read about or heard about? So I know meetings can be really boring and useless.
Not this one.
Not this one. This one's very exciting. But other meetings. And so I think that getting together in whatever forum, I think that's really important.
Other thoughts?
Sure. So what I will say is the relationships are incredibly important, and you need to build those, or you will never do this. But once you actually start walking down the path, you need to have a common goal in mind, and for every group that you're working with. If you don't have that, you will not be successful, and you must understand that you're not going to get everything you want out of every transaction, and that if you get 70% or 80%, that's great. Our Shannon West development is a prime example of working together, because not only did we have 4 agencies, we had private investors, we had private donations. I think in total we had 7 or 8 different sources of funding, and not all of them got along, but we had a common goal. And so people were willing to give up that 20% that maybe they wanted and would normally demand. So you have to be willing to do that and go into it with an open mind like that.
And in terms of building relationships, I think it's important that we dive into the details of what each agency, what their strength and weakness is, and that means being honest with yourself and being honest with others as well, because a lot of the times the most successful collaborations we find, first of all, I want to say that building administrative capacity and collaboration should not happen as a response to a funding opportunity, but it should just be part of your DNA and how you approach your business on a day-to-day basis, because it's impossible to do this after the fact. Something comes out, $2 million, everyone gets excited, all of a sudden they've been saying they've been collaborating and doing this for years. Well, that's not really true, and that veil, that thin veil goes away really quickly. So it's important to be doing this in the long run and just practicing this as your day-to-day behavior. So I agree, going out to these things more, networking, connecting, but another thing to do is there are some agencies that are capable of doing everything as a one-stop shop, but typically not, which is why those graphs are so red, being the government doing that part, because they're the ones that have, the horsepower and the bandwidth to really do this. But the government doesn't have everything, and neither do the nonprofit sector. So we really need to think about what everyone can give and take. And the best example I can think of that recently for us is us partnering with the county and another agency to go after this grant that our community desperately needed. Because not only would it bring beds to critical youth populations, but it also helped us increase our overall portfolio, which made us competitive for other grants that were related to that. So the county had the capacity to administer the grant and be the fiduciary agent. Neither of the nonprofit agencies at the time could administer grants like that directly very well. However, this is a transitional living grant, and this was also a maternity group home grant. The county doesn't really operate a lot of transitional living and maternity group homes. There's agencies in town that do both. So our strength was transitional living. Our partner agency strength was maternity group, and the county's strength was proven experience. They had the credit that we didn't with the federal government. So when we all came together, it's like starting a business together. Collaboration isn't just saying, well, let me just write down your name and my name and someone else's name and hey, we're good, we're collaborating now. No, it's you are literally starting a whole new business, and it has rules, it has structures, and you need to define those up front. Please don't go in collaborating with someone and just keep it really high and surface level and expect everything to work out. You need to get the nuts and bolts around reporting, what everyone's doing, how this tripod is actually going to sustain the weight of the grant. And if any of those legs are weak, it will crumble and the grant won't be renewed. So really, you have to focus on bringing your strength to the table, all your partner's strengths to the table, but then negotiating upfront what everyone is doing and having mutual accountability, but equity as well. Just because, you know, some people are afraid to partner with the local government or whatever because they're funders for other things and they don't want to, you know, step on anyone's toes, but you're negotiating. This is a business transaction, so everyone has to be upfront with what they want, what they can bring to the table, and what their value propositions are that they're bringing forth. From that, you create your business model, and that business model is your grant application. You should do all this before. Sounds like an incredible amount of hard work to do just to apply for a grant, but in our experience, that's been the most successful ones. Because even if we don't get that grant, we've created a business model that we can go apply in other areas. And that is a way to do grants that isn't responding to grants, but rather you're in the continuous active innovation and creating these sort of business plans, and then somebody will come along and eventually fund it. So that's sort of our strategy to that.
Super. Julia, yeah.
I will just add quickly. So I don't want to be a downer, but one of the things that's been frustrating, at least at the state level, is the lack of relationships. I can't even tell you how many times recently, because everybody's fighting over dollars, I'll get called to a meeting with the sheriff and the county manager, and they'll say, you don't fund us for reentry, and I'll pull up the grant. Yeah, we do. I fund you this amount of money, and it goes to your social service agency, for example. And then they'll say, well, how's that money being used? I don't know, and it's embarrassing that you're having this conversation in front of your funder. So I've literally, and they've said, why don't you schedule a meeting with them and us, and we'll talk about it. And again, I'm like, oh my God, I'm your funder. You should not, I would never have this conversation in front of CDC or SAMHSA or HRSA. You need to have this conversation locally, and I would say this group, just from the few minutes I've been involved, could have that conversation and say, we're ready. It's these 5 agencies. Here's how we're going to execute it, and we want that money. And so I'd say really, really do your research before you come to the state. And you can come to the state and say, we need blah, blah. Even I get so much, we need money for homeless youth. And it's like, wow, you need to be talking to a rash. Like you should talk, understand what's out there before you come to us and ask for money, because you just are so much stronger in that capacity. And also if you're competing against another county or geographic region that is really solid, it's going to be so much easier to fund that region than to try to have those meetings with everybody and figure out who wants to get what piece and who's the fiduciary agent and do we all agree on these smart objectives. Have that conversation before you come to us, because then it can be so much faster. Or when a grant hits, we say, you know what, Las Vegas is ready, done, closed, no more applicants, just Vegas. So I would say that would be my biggest suggestion, because I guess as dollars get smaller or even bigger, it doesn't matter. Whoever's the strongest coming to the table for the state is going to get the award, because we can invest a ton of time in doing community building for you and figuring out who your partners are. So I so appreciate the comments up here. It just shows how solid you guys are in this process and really would give us so much more opportunity to fund.
And
Let me, this is the challenge of a moderator, which I always fail at, which is when you've got great people up here, how do you cut them off, right? It's not a fun task. But I do want to cut them off for a second, only because I want to see, I know if folks out here have 1 or 2 questions to pose to these folks while you have them as a sort of captive panel up here. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Annie Lindsay. I'm with the University of Nevada, associate professor in Nevada Extension. And I have a kind of question, and I think Arash, you addressed it super nice, but I'd like to hear from maybe the rest of the panel. really interested in the sustainability part of it. 'Cause I feel like a lot of times states get grants, and I work a lot, with grants in our own system, and we see people do these great projects, and then that's the end of it. Grant ends, and that's the end of it. People say, whatever happened to this great thing we were doing in this, poverty-driven neighborhood? Well, the money ran out. And I'd really like to see how, as a state, we can work more collaboratively to sustain those dollars. And like I said, Arashi addressed it very nicely, but I'd like to hear from the rest of the panel related to that.
In other words, I won't talk.
So I could say from the state, we're really trying to build into our wards, what's your sustainability plan? But I feel like it's almost empty. Like they'll write something in there, we will go after other awards, and theoretically we would say the same thing in a federal grant if we wrote it. But there is no real sustainability plan unless we, for us, build it into the general fund budget, and that's a very difficult ask. That said, one of the counties I met with, a rural county, said it's really difficult when you say you give us 1-year awards, and you can't hire staffing on a 1-year award. It's just not the best thing to do for that individual. So they said, how about this? Could you potentially give us a 4-year award or a 5-year award and cut us 20% every year, so that for sustainability we only need to come up with a little bit and we know going in that it's 5 years. That's a lovely idea, and I would love to start funding based on that. So we're really considering how can we do that with the partner so that it's agreed upon going in. Like, we will start cutting you off. The other thing that we get a lot is make it Medicaid billable, and it'll be Medicaid billable. And it's like, again, great in concept, but that's not an easy ask. So if we do want to make a service Medicaid billable eventually, you better be investing a whole lot of time with Medicaid to get those waivers through or whatever's necessary to get that. Because again, it would just be empty if you say, like, theoretically other states have made it Medicaid billable. That's very difficult.
I think from my perspective, we have what appears from my position, a lack of business community and philanthropic participation with us. We saw that change with HELP. We had a foundation that stepped up and was really key to making sure this got done. But that is an area where I think the sustainability, where there's opportunity to grow that. And I don't know how we do that. I don't know how we get, I think it's starting to happen with our local philanthropic and business community. It's just not quite there yet.
Kristen, I want to say thank you for the segue for the unsolicited answer to this question, because I wanted to bring this up, but I didn't want to go, hey, funders, hey, program directors, think about this. But it is true that if we want to be more competitive as a community with federal grants, we need to get away from this concept of admin ratios and just that being this like barometer check of an organization's health or capacity, because you cannot compare the admin ratio of multiple different human service industries. I mean, it's incomparable, like what healthcare has compared to academia, whatever. So we need to get away from that. And if we want to be more competitive as a community with federal funding, we need to start investing more in individual agencies' operational capacity. This is critical. If we're mandating that every dollar go to programs all the time, great. We're going to be helping what we can, but that allows very little wiggle room for innovation, capacity, and the things that are truly necessary to become more competitive down the line. For instance, part of our 5-year journey of becoming more competitive for federal grants involved us having the realization that, wait a second, we need a CPA. I mean, there's like a whole 40-hour class you have to take with this Department of Justice grant. That's just one grant stream. The reporting is, at least 10 reams of paper, on a monthly basis. So this is serious stuff. So we had to bolster down and build that capacity internally. But for funders and agencies, don't be afraid to ask for these dollars. Just prove why and how you're going to use them, not just that they're needed. Federal funders don't want to hear that you're doing a practice. They want to hear how and why you're doing it. So investing in our own capacity is critical in our journey for our communities in aggregate to become more appealing for federal investment.
Perfect. I'm getting really clear signals that we've gone over time.
We all
but
run
listen,
businesses like that.
But listen, I really appreciate the panel. I appreciate the question. Let's thank our panel for a wonderful discussion.
Whatever do you mean, Benoit? All right, thank you to the panel. That was great. And this group isn't the only one that's seen some success in collaboration and working together. We have a great success story that we'd like to hear from Jody Tyson to discuss the Breakfast Before the Bell program from 3 Square Food Bank. So if I could bring up Jody Tyson, Director of Government Affairs.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that the room is full. It's like standing room only. I see Scott in the back, but there's a chair up front if you really want to come and sit down. So, okay. So it's good. Sometimes we need to be able to stand up. I just want to make sure as people come in too that that they know that there's room in the front. It's great that the room is so full and everyone really wants to talk about what we can do to be more competitive in our federal grants opportunity, but also, where can we learn from each other. I know that I serve on a lot of boards. I serve on the board for the Rape Crisis Center, and they have a pot of money that they can go really to. It's hard sometimes to branch out just a little bit, and so we'll talk a little bit about where our core mission is in food, but then how we branched out just a little bit too. So we will actually briefly discuss a little bit more than our Breakfast After the Bell project, just so that we can round out the discussion about what does it mean to be a collaborative partner in the community. So my focus will really be on children's meals, but we'll talk about some other grants too. I'd like to start by addressing the elephant in the room, which was the slide that Meredith started with. It said the Department of Agriculture was the highest rated in terms of federal monies that they bring in. And we fall under that. And so, in some ways, we're low-hanging fruit when it comes to how we go after federal funds in our state. The Department of Agriculture, if you looked at the difference between where the state government is bringing in money and where the nonprofits are bringing in money, a lot of what the Department of Agriculture actually is bringing in is just pass-through then to other organizations. And 3 Square Food Bank is an example of one of those organizations that actually benefits from the work of the Department of Agriculture. It's not that they're going after grants that other states aren't going after, or that we're more competitive in that way. A lot of this is specific to, we need to feed kids. There are lots of ways to do that. We don't have to write a grant to do that. We just have to show that we can serve these populations of kids, and then we're given like a cooperative agreement. There is no limit on what we can do. There's no limit on the amount of reimbursements that we can do for meals. So if a community is 200,000 meals, that's great. If a community is 200 million meals, that's great too. There's room in the federal budget for all of that. So in some ways, we're just limited by our own capacity internally to be able to do what we need to do in the community. So I just want to acknowledge that. Our organization, though, does strive to be very good at going after federal grants when it's appropriate to do so. Sometimes the state applies for that because sometimes it's written in that way that the state can apply, but they can partner with nonprofits. And sometimes it's that the state can apply or a nonprofit can apply. We have tried to leverage our relationships with local government agencies to also go after seed funding opportunities, then to expand our federal meal programs. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. First, in 2015, although I will say legislation attempted to happen before 2015, but in 2015 we were successful in taking to the legislature a requirement that breakfast be served at the start of the school day when kids are enrolled in free and reduced lunch at a school that meets at least 70% of their total population of students. So if you were in a high needs school at 70% free and reduced lunch population, the legislature said yes, you will be required as a school to provide breakfast after the bell. We tried for many years, even before I came to the food bank, many years to help with voluntary opportunities to expand breakfast. We were last in the nation. We were behind Guam and how we were delivering breakfast to kids. So we tried all sorts of routes, and then we finally ended up going for the policy. Now, that's a big ask. And you have to really show documentation that you have tried for a long time before you ask the legislature to make something mandatory in order to be able to draw down more of those federal funds. But we were able to do that because we were able to show a long history of trying to work on a voluntary basis and an innovative program basis to try to increase breakfast among kids. And we were able to show to the legislature that we needed a policy to do that. So 2014, we're last in the country. We are last among the territories. I like to say in 2017, on February 14th this year, FRAC, which is the Food Research and Action Center, published a school breakfast report, and Nevada is now 7th in the country in delivering breakfast to kids. Yay! So sometimes you have to go for the big win, and that's policy, and that drives our opportunity to really to go after those federal funds. I will say that we then came back to the table and said in 2017 to the legislature, we've had so much momentum, we would like to try voluntary again. Like, we'd like to try to expand this even to schools that are between 60 and 69%. And I will say we got crickets, from the schools. So in this area, policy drove that opportunity. And it was huge for us. So the breakfast program in the very first year went from an $11 million program to an over $15 million program. And like I said, we went from serving from 51st to 7th in the nation. The state in 2015 put up $2 million, $1 million each year of the biennium. In the first year, we were able to increase the reimbursements by that $4 million. So for every dollar they invested, we got back $4 in federal funds. And now just really quickly, after school meals, I'd like to say we have really worked hard to have a relationship with our municipalities so that our priorities are their priorities, right? So Southern Nevada Strong, we were participating in healthy communities. When it came to doing the Henderson Comp Plan, we were there in healthy communities, talking about the importance of breakfast, after school meals, summer meals. Our priorities are your priorities. And when we're able to infuse those into the local regional plans, then we're able to be more successful in saying, okay, so here's the identification of some of these grants that we can go after. We used opportunities like CHAMPS and Invest Health, which are opportunities that municipalities have, to talk about collective impact opportunities to bring everyone's best resources to the table. So CHAMPS is through the League of Cities, the National League of Cities. They thought municipalities can make a real difference in children's meal programs. And Invest Health, the same thing. So we use that as an opportunity to, again, infuse our priorities to make them collective priorities and to move that ball forward. And Arash actually talked about them as learning communities, and that's true because the CHAMPS programs and the Invest Health programs had cohorts of cities across the country, and we were able to learn best practices from all of what they were doing. The other piece I just want to quickly give you is about Feeney. The state decided to apply for Feeney back in 2015-16, and Connie's nodding her head because we all went through this together, and we're unsuccessful. And I will say, when we talked to the state about whether or not we should all be applying for Feeney, they said, well, we only really want to put in one grant for the state, and their focus was on Northern Nevada. And we said, but we have projects and things that we want to be doing in the South. They went ahead and they put in for the larger piece of that grant. They were not funded that year. But the next year, they came back to us and said, if you guys want to put in that grant, we'll support your effort to do that. And so we started 6 months before we knew that that grant was coming back out again, because it's an annual grant that comes out. And through the Southern Nevada Food Council, we were able to pull a group together from UNSI, from the food bank. We served as their fiscal agent. Vegas Roots Gardens really had the drive about what they wanted to do in the community. And we pulled those resources together, and we wrote the grant together, and we got the funding to do that. So now in Feeney, if you're a SNAP recipient, you can go to a farmer's market or to other places, and you can get $1 extra in fruits and vegetables for every dollar you spend in your SNAP benefits. So it's super fantastic. And And I'm just really glad to know that when the state realized that there may be multiple priorities in our state, like we don't maybe have to have that conversation about does the state just do one? Because I guarantee you California is not saying, well, San Diego's doing this, so really Sacramento, you don't need to do that. I think that there's really opportunities for us to say, if we're doing different things, we're focusing on different parts of the state, we may need to just make a commitment that we're going to put in multiple opportunities for that grant. So I just want to say that, and I hope I don't offend anybody by doing that. I love Julia. I love our folks at the state. I love Connie. But I think we need to change our mindset when it comes to that. And I think that's one of the things that holds us back as to not being more competitive in our applications. And I will just say that the food bank really strives to help support folks that are looking to do work in food and food insecurity, but it may not exactly be in our wheelhouse. So we can't sell produce to folks in a veggie buck truck because nothing that comes out of the food bank can ever be sold. But Vegas Roots Gardens could do that, but they couldn't serve as the fiscal agent because they hadn't been around long enough. They didn't have that credit score up, but the food bank did. And so we found an opportunity to do that and to really help to serve the community. So I would just put that out there to you guys. Maybe you've been thinking about how you could help make a difference in food insecurity, but not sure if you have that credit score that's up there. Please come see me. We'd love to work with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Jody, and thank you to all the work that your organization does. My wife works for a nonprofit and often partners with Three Square and to get healthy food into low-income communities. And so if she were here, she'd thank you for that as well. So we've heard from a think tank, we've heard from the state, we've heard from the county, we've heard from some nonprofits. Now let's hear from kind of the foundation perspective. So what I'd like to do is introduce Poonam Mathur to come up, and she's the executive director of the Elaine P. Wynn and Family Foundation. Poonam, thank you.
I'm a hugger. I am too. I actually like him better like this. And apparently I've now made him really difficult and complicated to live with. I apologize. Wow, this is an awesome afternoon. Just from my own curiosity, how many of you are CEOs of nonprofits in the house? Thank you for being here. How many of you would be in C-level role in your nonprofit? Senior leadership role? Okay. How many of you are in the money, in the business of getting money for your nonprofit? Hallelujah. Glad you're here. Okay. So this is cool. I'm just going to go with it. 7 years ago, I think it was about then, maybe 6, 2 conversations that I had then, very different, but occurring around the same time, now lunged to the front of my mind. So I'm going to share both with you. One was a conversation with Miles Dixon and Julie Murray and I, and we were at Greenspun, right? With who? Bruce Bottleson. Okay. And Miles that day, as Miles is prone to do, he's a guy that just likes to, he's like Wayne Gretzky. He's just following some puck way out there. All of us are busy hacking away at each other's ankles and the stick, and he's talking about pucks in the future. And that day, the puck in the future that he drew our attention to was the amount of federal money that we leave on the table. And that was about 7 years ago. And I remember being really compelled and a bit overwhelmed, and then I grabbed my stick and I looked down, and I've played hockey ever since, staring down at my skates. Around the same time, I got requalified as a foster parent to take in one of my adopted son's neighborhood buddies. So when I got sort of permission to probe into his school file, he was a freshman. So I went to the school feeling really emboldened that now I could get the real facts. And what I learned was he had had a banner freshman year. I mean, 3 things, and you try to log all 3. I think it's a trifecta. He earned 1 credit, had a GPA 0.9, and had been expelled. So I'm like, well, my boy, I got good news and I got bad news. The good news is we know that terra is firma. Bad news is we're in subterranean ditch. So I don't know why, but both of those conversations have surged up for me as I've been sitting here being really inspired and motivated, also sort of a bit humbled by how deep a ditch we stand in. So I just want to not be a downer, but just to set a frame, right? There's some things that I just think are important to bear in mind. I don't know how many things we can be 49th on, but man, we're good at that. Like, what's that? We're number one in being 49th. And you know what? Justification is my first go-to in the face of all opposing information. We're 49th in a lot of things. Most states in the union rely on federal money to fund the majority of their social services. And Meredith, thank you. Man, you're smart. So I took a couple things. So if I got them wrong, I need you to quietly correct me later, but let me just, don't do it now? Okay, thank you. Here's what I think I heard is taking it aside Medicaid, looking at sort of the competitive federal grants, we brought down 2% as nonprofits in 2017. It's about $100 million. 49th. Yay! I also remember it was Jeremy Aguero who does an annual study for the Moonridge Group to quantify corporate philanthropy on an annual basis in the state of Nevada. I think it was 14, 15, so maybe a couple years old, so plus or minus a few bucks. It was about $100 million. So if we want to stay small, we can. Because it's really, those are not insignificant chunks, right? We can get our elbows up and we can sell one additional table to our event rather than their event as the way to incremental growth. We can incrementally do a wee bit better and move that number to 110 million next year. That is a possibility. That is a choice, and it is up to us as leaders to really decide what it is that we want, right? Or we can say, as the Pew Charitable Trust survey just reminded us, that a move for us from 49th to 48th translates into $258 million a year. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. Here's the cool part about standing deep in a subterranean ditch with terra firma. There is no place to go but up. That's the good news about having a FICO score that's sub 100. There is no way to go but up. So let's do this thing. Because 49th is not so fun. And I just want to do a quick put up. 7 years ago, that conversation happened. 2011, we took good action. We created the grants office at the state. A mighty troika, 3 people. This is not Connie with the last name. This is the Coninator. You are like, you're like the Black Panther of grants in Nevada. Boom, right there. Let me just tell you what they have done so far. These are the tailwinds, right? It's not all headwinds. Here are the tailwinds that are going to get us up and moving fast out of 49th. Connie, created in 2011, 3 people. 1 more, I think, added in 15. End of this session, 1 more administrative support. We're at mighty, you're like a basketball team with no spare. Fiscal year 15-16, combined, this office assisted 113 grants, yes, totaling in $131 million. That wouldn't have been there but for the Coninator. That's a return for every dollar invested of $219. For every dollar invested, $219. Now I will tell you, on behalf of Elaine's foundation, I get a lot of really well done pleas for money. I'm not sure I get proposals or theories of action for solution. That's what we're talking about here, right? So, as it was for that foster kid, whose name is Devin, by the way, he's now 21, he graduated high school on time. Anything is possible, right? So I said to him, bad news, good news. Terra firma, bad news, subterranean ditch. We all want a lot of stuff. We want not to be 49th. We want to get our fair share and maybe a little bit more. We want to solve the pernicious problems that all of us spend all day, every day thinking and working on. So here's the only question that we need to ask or answer is, what are we willing to do, right? Are we willing to do the kind of probative introspection that Arash just challenged us to do, right? Nancy Bruin said, we got to be project ready, we got to be grant ready. Easy to say, what are we willing to do, right? Are we as CEOs of our organizations willing to say, forever we've operated on a 12-month budget cycle, that is what we are muscle memory to do. That is what every accounting system understands. That is what our reporting looks like. That is what our board is expecting. Are we willing to develop the internal capability and all that that requires to start looking at 2 to 3 years out? Are we willing to do that? Some of you have already said yes to that. And some of you are already bearing the benefits of that, right? Are we willing to trust differently? I mean, Arash, what you were describing, it's not just a business relationship, it's like an arranged marriage. You don't check chemistry and fit. You're like, this is going to work. I come from the land of arranged marriages. When they work really well. And they can go south really hard, right? Right? We know that. So, I've been sitting here and I've got lots of different hats on. So yes, I am here on behalf of a family foundation. There is never going to be enough money for this one foundation to meet all your needs, ever. I love the observation, and I would affirm it, is with regular funders, plead your case for capacity. If you need to modify your accounting systems to build your muscle to strengthen your FICO score to go after federal grants, you make that case to your funder. Don't deny them the ability to say yes or no, right? But make that case. If you want to expand your staff by having a full-time grant writer, or you want to timeshare a grant writer with other like-minded organizations, don't be afraid to make that case. If you want to get a policy person, even as a consultant on your staff, so that they're running around the policy discussions where you need to be present, don't be afraid to make that case. You'll have to train us as funders, because all too often we're like 7% administration. Wow, that's really high. But you can make that case, because this and everything that you've already laid out and the strategic plan that is the work product that I've seen really says it beautifully. So I would say to you, especially the CEOs, right? This is a product. There's that, what are we calling it, Miles? Is it the strategic plan? What is it?
Strategic framework.
Strategic framework.
It's available on the S.Nevada website.
And
the one page back here.
moral of the story is don't let them get a word in edgewise. Yes, download it. It's 16 pages, I think. I printed it out. It's tight, it's concise, it is bizarrely logical, it is insanely compelling. Pull it down and make sure you've got that. That work product, how many of you were involved in the creation of that? Lift your hands up high. Thank you. So there's already a bunch of work that's been done, right? This is a launch, is it not? It is a launch. From here, periodically, for the next 3 or 4 sessions, Miles? Yeah, Raymond, you guys are going to bring everybody together. So for the CEOs in the room, this may be the one time that you intersect and spend time. But please know your people have put blood, sweat, and tears into this already because they believe. And please know that they're willing to keep going. And at some point, as leaders, board members, CEOs, it is our obligation to convey and communicate to them that first you've got their back, and that you're serious enough to look in the mirror and do the evaluation, right? The self-assessment. What do we need to do better? How can we be better? How can I strengthen relationship? How can I build a system? How can I make sure that the language that I'm using is the same as the language that my partner is using, so that when we show up and call Connie and have her review our grant, we don't get a thumbs down, right? So they need and deserve our support. So for those of you that have led to the product today, I want to honor you. For those of you that are going to stay with this and keep doing this diligent work, I want to honor you. And for the leaders in the room, the CEOs of you, let's step up and really show them that we got their back and do what we can, right? Because ultimately, Devin, the question I posed to him, I said, what do you want? And he said, I want to graduate from high school. Would have been easy for a freshman with 1 credit, GPA of 0.9 and expulsion to answer a whole lot lower aspiration than that. Just like it would be easy for us to say, yeah, we're striving for 48. What he said to me is, I want to graduate on time. That would be like us saying number 1 or bust. So I said to him, what are you willing to do? It's the only thing you need to answer. What are you willing to do? And he said, I'm going to do anything. I will do what it takes. And you know what? For the next 3 years, he did. And it wasn't easy. And it wasn't simple. And it wasn't without insane demands. And it didn't not stretch him to the outer limits of his capability. 3 years in June, that kid walked across the stage on time. So we can do that, right? Because 49th, while we're really comfortable sitting there, it ain't the outfit that suits us best. So I'm going to now stop and let this program go on. I just want to quickly honor the organizations that seem to do, like, there's always like really good stuff happening, and when that's happening, what I'm seeing is there's RTC, United Way, Nevada Community Foundation. God love you for doing this. And then to 3 Square, you know, I was a member of the board as we watched the Jodinator do her thing. And what I've just learned this afternoon is, what were the 2 F words, 4-letter acronyms? Frick and frack and fence.
Oh, I was like, oh, did I say anything bad?
No.
FRAC is the Food Research and Action Center.
Yes. And then the other one? Fin or
Oh, FENI. Sorry. FENI is the Food Incentive Nutrition Initiative.
right. I just wanted you all to know that, because I didn't want you to have the same impression that I had, which is everything around 3 Square involves 4-letter words. It does not. I just want to honor you for what you believe, what you've already done, what you're about to do, and for just being tenacious and dogged in getting this done. Because I am so preaching to the choir, which is what makes me honor you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Poonam. That was fantastic. All right, last but not least, we have to turn our attention to how we can all collectively coordinate our actions to prioritize and secure federal grants. To discuss this in detail, I'd like to welcome our last speakers for this afternoon, Justin Harrison, Government Affairs Director for the Las Vegas Metro Chamber of Commerce, and John Ritter, member of the Nevada Grants Council and president of the Ritter Charitable Trust.
Awful big table up here.
Yeah. It's kind of weird because we're supposed to be asking each other's questions, and I don't know if we should be sitting next to each other or at the ends of the table, or...
I'll go to the back if that makes sense.
Yeah, we can yell across the room. That'd be good. Well, thank you for this opportunity. I wanted to start by just thanking Southern Nevada Strong for providing this venue and this conversation. As we'll discuss here, there's many of us that have been working on this issue for years, and it's not a sexy issue. But I will tell you, monetarily, as a businessman in the community, having had to work and lobby every session for the last 10 sessions or so on filling a budget gap, that this kind of unsexy issue to our state could mean $500 million a biennium or more. And a number of those budget gaps have been around those numbers. So it's a big deal to me. I also wanted to wanted to thank Miles, who, at least as far as Ritter Charitable Trust is concerned and Nevada Community Foundation, started this whole conversation 6-7 years ago. Poonam mentioned that, and has been dogged to keep the conversation moving forward, and has been telling me, you need to show up here and you need to say this. So thank you, Miles. So we're gonna ask each other questions. I hope this doesn't seem too staged, because we have had no time to talk about this much. So I'm gonna ask the first question of Justin. So Justin, how is the Metro Chamber engaged in supporting increasing federal grant funding in Nevada and Southern Nevada, and why are you involved?
Sure. Again, thanks, John, and quickly thanks to all the partners who helped put this together and invite us here today. I'll start with echoing your comments. The Miles trap got us. That was the first real blip on our radar regarding federal grants was Miles and the folks at J.A. Barrett Company, Nevada Community Foundation, John, yourself, really engaging with the business community, and that's how it first came on our radar. And subsequently, through the last number of legislative sessions, it's become a priority for the Metro Chamber. Typically, we're thought of as we're a business organization, we're a business coalition, but really, our leadership has seen the benefit that can be brought through federal grants. We're sending our tax dollars to Washington, D.C., and we're not getting them all back. We should all be getting thank you notes from New York, but we're not. So we see that as was mentioned by Meredith and a number of others. The budget is something that, especially through the economic downturn, we turn to cuts, and we also turn to the business community to raise taxes to fill those holes. And we're starting to see how those pieces come together and really build that strong relationship there. Specifically to your question, John, how we're helping to kind of continue increased understanding of the importance of federal grants from the business community and the community at large. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Southern Nevada Forum. This is something that was started a number of legislative sessions ago by Marilyn Kirkpatrick, who was the speaker at the time, now a member of the County Commission. And we've become the conveners of that interim meeting series. And it has become a priority of the Southern Nevada Forum for, this is now the third session. So I'll plug that next meeting that Meredith and Miles will be presenting at regarding federal grants on April 12th, just across the street over at our offices in the Smith Center. Excuse me. So that's the long and short of where we are trying to find a place where we can help the grants conversation continue. John, for you, you've worked in the space for a number of years. How are you personally and your organization helping to continue that conversation?
So again, we've been involved since Miles sort of said this is something that's really important and you've really got to take a hard look at this. And the Ritter Charitable Trust and Nevada Community Foundation and Council for a Better Nevada teamed up together to fund a study that Miles led. And the agreement, at least from our end, was I'm not interested in another study. I'm interested in an action plan to come up with this. And so that study did have an action plan, and we've been working for the last 3 legislative sessions, I think it is, to enact that action plan. And I just wanted to say to everybody, this is a huge challenge, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think we've made some really great steps. You've heard a number of the speakers here talk about them. My focus is generally kind of at the legislative level. That's the area at which I am comfortable and excel to a certain extent. And so we've gotten a number of pieces of very important legislation passed. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. And I think that if we all work together to keep moving forward, just keep moving this ball forward, get a little bit done or a lot done if you can every session. That's kind of what I see our role is. We're collaborators, we're conveners, and along with Miles, just keep pushing the ball forward.
John, there's obviously you've got a lot of time vested in this subject. What are some of the best ways that you have seen for nonprofits to get engaged regionally or at the statewide level?
So I think one of the great things that's come out of this conversation today is collaboration. And so I'm going to plug something that I'm involved in where maybe you could collaborate with us. So one of the things that we've accomplished, and I mean lots of people, many hands make light work. One of the things that was accomplished in 2015 is that we were successful in advocating for the state to create a grants council. And this is something that when you look at other comparable states that do much better than we are, this is one of the components in one form or another that they have. And there's only 7 of us on this council. I'm privileged to serve as the chairman. We have state representatives. We have representatives from nonprofits. We have representatives from state departments. We meet 4 times a year. Here's the plug. The next meeting is May 2nd. And we really appreciate input at those meetings. Whether you want to contact Connie and actually make a presentation to the council, or whether you want to provide public comment. You know, I will say that we did go into that process after the study with sort of a set of steps that we were going to take over many years, and thought that we knew what needed to be done and we knew everything that was going on. But it's pretty eye-opening when you hear from the people that are actually in the field, that do this every single day, and what their challenges are. So the testimony has changed our focus in some ways, and I think that's incredibly important. So, you know, I'd welcome any of you to participate in the council. I'm next. Thought I could just sit here and do nothing. So Justin, what do you think the important 2 or 3 strategies are for successfully engaging policymakers?
Sure. John, you mentioned the legislative session, and I'm going to use a word that might make a few of you cringe. As 501c3 organizations, you hear advocacy, you get a little worried. Don't be scared of it, though. I promise. I will plug the Gwynn Center. They've got a great handout in the back called Advocacy 101, what to do, what not to do. Please talk to your attorneys. But, you know, reference that sheet. That's where the cringe comes in. You know, it's so important that you're able to talk to, especially right now, our state lawmakers. They I think, are beginning to see the light as to why federal grants are important and how it fits into that budget conversation, how it fits into your programming conversations. They're starting to see that light, and I would just encourage you to reach out to them, develop those relationships. Don't be scared of them. They really do want to hear from you. We are lucky that we're in such a small state. We do have a citizen legislature that meets only every other year, but continues to meet through the biennium, and they really are an accessible state body as compared to many other states. You know, most of their phone numbers are published on a website. If you can't get a hold of someone, please contact me if you need to. I'm happy to make a connection, because as we have started to work with different nonprofit organizations, develop coalitions between funders, between nonprofits, state legislators. They've started to see that light, as I mentioned, and we've really started to make strides. You know, Puna mentioned going from 49th to 48th. It's like $150 million difference. That's huge. That's huge for everyone in this room, and we want to be part of that. So I would just say, don't be afraid to advocate. Develop those relationships with legislators, and develop those relationships between each other, between other nonprofit entities, and really try to build those coalitions. And don't be afraid to come to Carson City. It's not that pretty in the winter, but you make a big difference. John, turning back to you, you have been the chair of the Nevada Grants Council. What do you see as some of the most important barriers or biggest barriers to overcome for success as we move forward?
So when we started really looking at this issue, it became clear that there were some just structural problems in the state with the way that well, I won't even say that we did it, because we essentially had no real grant structure other than the agencies that pursued the grants that they were going to pursue. We didn't have the structure in place that the states that do much better than we do have. And I promised Miles I wouldn't get into the weeds here and scare people on some of the legislation we're working on, but there are some just structural issues in terms of timing to get, especially at the state level, to get your programs funded and to get work programs approved. We have no mechanism in the state to handle matching funds. Many grants require matching funds. That's a big thing. One thing that we did get approved, and Miles said not to mention this, but I'm going to mention it, is we got a statewide grants management system approved, which for the first time when we get this thing up and running, the second lowest bidder, I think it was, appealed it, and that for some reason at the state takes 9 months or so just to figure out how to handle that. But when that gets approved and in place, we'll finally, like most states that are very successful at doing this, we'll finally have a place that you can go where you can see all of the grants activity in the entire state, and you can see the grants opportunity, and you can see people that are partnering, or people that are interested in partnering on grants. And so we're still working on a lot of different things, and more ideas and challenges we want to tackle come from every meeting that we have, particularly from the testimony of people like you at the meeting. And the last thing I would say is, again, a collaboration. And I know that it's really difficult to run a nonprofit and to try to fund an executive director, fund a fundraising person, let alone a grants writer. And so one of the things that I'd like to see over time, and we've been talking about this a lot at the council, is providing some bandwidth to the community so that we could have grants writers that smaller nonprofits could share, those that don't or can't afford their own. And the last thing I will say is just this one issue that's come up in this meeting is this idea that a nonprofit has to show how little money they can spend and how much they can invest in the community, which is, that's noble, but the issue is, how can you effectively run an organization if you're short-staffed? And I think that that's one of those issues that may be a marathon, because we've got to change donors, funders' perception of that. I also know that a lot of donors and funders want to fund capital improvements and things they can actually see, and maybe meals going to people, and they don't want to really fund the administrative stuff. It's one of the things that Ritter Charitable Trust does quite a bit, is we fund that stuff. So that's another thing I think we need to educate our funders and our donors over time about.
So the funny part about me coming up here is, right when John said, Miles said not to say this, I got a text from Miles saying, we're running long, we should probably wrap this up. So there's the cue, right? So here I am. So just a couple closing remarks. First of all, I want to thank all of the speakers, all of the panelists today. I think it was a very enlightening discussion. So let's give them all one more last round of applause. All right, so your first opportunity to put some of this stuff into action is a grant opportunity that's coming up like in a couple weeks, April 11th. So let's get to it. So the RTC is accepting applications for the Community Mobility Program. It was formerly known as the Job Access Reverse Commute Program, or 5310. And so this is for any nonprofit transportation providers, especially if they serve senior citizens, individuals with disabilities, or low-income individuals. So that opportunity is coming up in just a couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for it. If you do provide any transportation services, this is something that you can look to as a resource. So I think Poonam had mentioned that this was just the launch pad for future work, and it is indeed. We have 4 of these types of workshops scheduled, and so the first one is focused on. We'll walk participant. Or actually, this is the first one. You're all here. You're at the first one. So let's talk about the next one. Huh? And thank you all for coming, by the way. Let's talk about the next one. Workshop 2 will walk participants through the process of identifying capacity and readiness through the lens of evaluating a grant opportunity's fit. Workshop 3 will review technical elements of crafting compelling grant applications with complex programs and partnerships, including elements of narrative, performance measures, budget, and sustainability. And then the 4th workshop will highlight and teach successful practices of ongoing evaluation, communication, and reporting from grantee to grantor and vice versa. So we were initially going to have some time for questions, but obviously we're running long. So instead, what I encourage all of you to do is break and network. I think that was a message we heard a lot today, was this need for collaboration, this need for us to really better understand what each of us is doing, and this is a perfect venue to do that. I want to thank all of you for coming out today, especially given the fact that it's spring break, and you thought, you know where I want to be at spring break? I want to be at a grants workshop. So give yourselves a round of applause for that. Huh? And then I also just want to give a shout out. So I want to thank, all the partners on this, but I especially want to thank, Miles Dixon, who's been working with us. Ray Lathrop, if you don't know Ray, she's our SNS program manager. Paul, are you still in the office? Paul is over there, Paul Gully. And then Daniel Fazekas is our Southern Nevada Strong team. So if you haven't met them, please do so, because we're here as a resource for all of you, and we're trying to advance this initiative as well as many others identified in Southern Nevada Strong. So thank you again for everything you do for our community. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for all of you for sharing your knowledge with us. Thanks.